Good morning and welcome back. Happy Tuesday. I'm Wendy Johnstone and I'm one of the program consultants and caregiver coaches with Family Caregivers of BC. And today we're going to talk about personal resiliency and caregiving, really kind of in life. I suspect we're targeting family caregivers, but I think all of us are always looking for ways to increase our personal resilience. I know I am. Especially in today's time of continued uncertainty. So welcome. It's always lovely to be here. Caregiver resiliency, it can be a challenge in managing the many aspects of care and life. And so one of the things that we try to think about around resiliency, some of these questions we ask caregivers and even questions we ask ourselves is, what gives us the strength to continue in challenging times? And also, how can you improve your ability to bounce back? And we have a wonderful flip book. I know it's just been put into the comments, which is great. And it's called Building Your Personal Resilience. It has a lot of great tips in there. We're going to focus a bit on part 1 today. And that's going to be simply understanding what resilience means, what it looks like. And then in part 2, we're going to focus on some of the strategies. But that flip book covers, a vast amount of information. Before we launch in, I'd like to talk about one of the caregivers that called us recently, and we're talking about personal resilience. And I want to relay her story and give a sense of who she is and what she was struggling with. So she is caring for her mother, who is only 65 years old, and she was diagnosed with an earlier onset dementia, Alzheimer's. Her mom's currently living in assisted living, and her daughter is over 2 hours away by car. She works full time. She has children, and really the daughter is having trouble coming to terms with her mom's dementia, but also really struggles with the distance between them and trying to balance her role as a family caregiver and traveling to see her mom when she can. This uncertainty of the future, and then also managing her own life, work and children, and this idea of keeping herself as healthy as possible. So the phone call came in and she was talking about how she really wants to be strong for herself and find ways to build on her strengths, but as well for her mom. And some of her worries around her mom end up being her safety. She also finds her mom's, repetitive behavior can be really challenging, which is of course understandable. Even though she knows it's the disease, she finds herself in conflict at times with this idea of the automatic reaction to, this is my mom, and this is, she's always been capable and independent, to a different individual that she's now dealing with in terms of some of the changes as a result of the disease. So she, called the caregiver line and was talking about this idea of, how do I keep myself, strong, or how do I bounce back? Like when my plate gets full, what happens is things start to, spill over, and I feel like I can't quite, pull it all together. And it's not just about personal resilience in that regard, but it's a real important component. So I just want to talk about that particular call that we had and highlight, you might be able to relate to some of those comments or some of those feelings that she was going through. So let's just define resiliency, because I think that's a really important place to begin. It's not just one thing, and it's how we as individuals adapt in a healthy way to stress. It's our ability as humans to recover from challenges or misfortune or too many things on our plate. Really this idea of resiliency is around when you pull the elastic band back and snap it, that it returns to its original form after being bent or pulled back or stretched out of shape. So this idea of it not being just one thing, resilience is about how we adapt in a healthy way to stress. This idea of bouncing back in terms of how we recover from a difficult situation, or I think in caregiving, this idea that there's a multitude of things that happen in sequence. And so how do we find ways to bounce back in between some of those challenges And also, I think this is one that we don't often talk about, but what the literature shows us is this idea around our capacity to grow from experience, or this idea of bouncing forward. And so how do we take moments when we can breathe and just have a few minutes of self-reflection, or when we get through a particularly challenging time, how do we look back and say, okay, what did we learn from that experience? I think that is this idea of how do we build from those experiences and build strength when going forward. I always like this image. I think we all know, about Tigger. My mother often referenced me as a Tigger. I was a child that was very bouncy and had lots of energy. And so I think about, Tigger, and he has this eternal optimism, but really, this idea of it's not about how fast we run or how high we climb, this idea of how well we bounce. And so I always think about Tigger and his ability to bounce on his tail. And he just seems to me that even though, he has his own challenges, he's a firm believer in personal resilience, that's for sure. So there's different aspects of resilience, and we're going to talk about a few of those today. There's a particular researcher or author, his name's Roland McCratty, and he sees resilience as based on how we self-manage and effectively use our energy in different domains. And in the flip book, there is a great graphic of what's called the dimensions of resilience. And there's four main categories. There's our physical resilience, there's our emotional resilience, there's our mental resilience, and there's our spiritual resilience. And so I think the dimensions of resilience, they're quite broad, and they're very customized to us as individuals. So for example, physical resilience is things like our endurance and our strength, and that's just sometimes the physical energy to be able to care day after day after day. The emotional resiliency comes around these ideas of how do we help self-regulate ourselves and our emotions in a way that allows us to build on our strengths, but also validate how we're feeling in the moment. Being able to experience a range of emotions, I think, is really important as well. And what the literature shows and talks about, and our idea of relationships, and how resilient those relationships are, and how we can bring strength from those relationships to help continue supporting ourselves as family caregivers. Our mental resilience, of course, is this idea of I find myself using this even with my teenage daughter, this idea of staying open to the world and staying open to ideas. She's a teenager, and right now, she seems to her narrow view sometimes can be quite narrow. So this idea of remaining open and flexible, I think, is really important. Sometimes our values and beliefs are really critical, and they make up this incredible foundation of who we are and our personalities. As we caregive and as we come across some challenging situations or ever evolving situations, this idea of having this mental flexibility can help ensure that we're able to see different points of view. And that's something that helps build resilience or maintain resiliency. The spiritual aspect, I think, is really important. And that is actually what grounds us. What are our commitments to our core values? And coming back to that foundation is a way that helps keep us focused on, sometimes the carrot down the road, or this idea of how we stay committed to ourselves as individuals, as well as trying to maintain our role as caregivers. This idea that around acceptance, I think, around especially when, for example, we have someone we're caring for and they're either in hospital or in long-term care facilities or assisted living or in even a different space. How do we have this flexibility of tolerance of perhaps how other individuals see caring or see that person It may not always align with how we're feeling or how we see it. This idea, though, that understanding that others have a different perspective, and again, coming back to this idea that sometimes those different perspectives are important to hear and see, either to validate that what we're doing is what we believe in, or also to say, oh, I hadn't thought about that, and for it to lend a different perspective into caregiving. So this idea of examples of resilience. So when we're feeling, for example, when we're feeling physically resilient, we feel usually strong and with good stamina. And so this then would translate into this idea of good energy during the day and being able to keep up with some of the physical aspects of caregiving. So for some caregivers, this will also mean having energy to be active. For some, it'll just have the energy to be able to move through their day and feel as though they're not completely drained. For others, sometimes we receive energy by being energetic and active. And so whatever that ends up being, but for some family caregivers, it is finding this way or ensuring there's space for some form of physical activity. Emotional resiliency, for example, can be shown through staying positive on the whole. This idea of trying to self-regulate our relationships. And this idea, especially during some of those more emotional storms, or when there's a very acute situation or a change. So when these dimensions all align, we'll often say, I feel really strong and I feel really resilient. We can usually intuitively know how that looks and feels. One of the important areas is sometimes to take that intuition and to dig a little bit deeper and to know what keeps us grounded. And we're gonna talk about this idea of how we do our self check-ins, because the different domains also tend to feed off of each other. And I think we understand this idea of building momentum. So when we take one step, even if it's a small step towards say for some family caregivers doing some meditation or doing some journaling, what we find is like, oh, that's going to help make me feel more grounded, and maybe I'm going to feel like I have a little more energy to go out and be a bit more physically active, or feel like I can self-regulate some of those relationships. So they tend to build on each other. And I think at the end of the day, I think what we're all hoping for, and what research, the literature supports, is this idea that when we feel less stressed and less overwhelmed and frustrated, those deplete our resources. And so we want to work towards finding ways to keep that more manageable, so that it helps maintain our resiliency or build our resilience. So this kind of checking in, I don't want to gloss over the fact that being resilient it's not simple. It takes work and it takes awareness. And so we want to be kind of transparent about that. And it's complex, and there's different dimensions, and we all react differently, and we all have different ways of managing our daily lives and caregiving. It's also important to know to understand that we all react differently to stress too. And so some strategies, that we're going to talk about in the next Facebook Live, they're going to work for one person and they not work for another. The important, I think, thing is this idea to meet yourself where you're at. And so one of the things that we encourage you to do between now and the next Facebook Live is to check in with yourself using the Resiliency check-in tool on our website. And we'll make sure the link gets into the comments below. It's actually, it's a separate downloadable PDF that you can download off the website. It's also referenced in the flip book as well. So that's one takeaway and one thing we hope that you'll consider doing between now and the next Facebook Live, so you'll have a sense of this check-in on meeting yourself where you're at. Where are your strengths? Where are you finding that you'd like to have some more support? Where, if you have any concerns, where are you concerned? And just bring that level of self-awareness and check in with ourselves. So our next Facebook Live is going to be in 2 weeks, and it's going to build on today's information and talk about strategies to build personal resilience. So be sure to come back and join us on November 24th for part 2. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. I'll have had a haircut, I hope, by then, because My hair is a little crazy today. And before we wrap up, I just want to remind everyone how you can find more support and resources. Our caregiver support line is available Monday to Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 7 p.m. And we can support you based on your unique needs, help bring awareness into your situation, listen to you, suggest ideas and resources. We can also refer you into more one-to-one support through our coaching service if it feels like a good fit. This idea of we have caregiver support groups virtually are a great place to talk about personal resilience and talk about areas that that you're concerned about, or hear about other caregiver stories, and especially some that have gone through a similar experience to yours. Tune into our podcasts. You can find that on our website, and we'll be linking it to our e-news and social media. And if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. And lastly, feel free to jump over to our resource section of the website. It has lots of great information on resiliency and beyond. And we also just like to remind people that at Family Caregivers of BC, we're here to support you, and all of us have been family caregivers or are currently family caregivers. And I would also say that all of us, we are currently and continually trying to work on our own personal resiliency too. It's something that we're trying to be mindful of as we're taking on work virtually and listening to caregiver stories and supporting. We're also doing our best to try and keep ourselves resilient so that we can continue providing support, but also ensuring that we're staying as healthy as possible. So with that, I hope you have a wonderful 2 weeks. Stay safe and healthy. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.